managerial accounting, planning and control, budgeted costs versus standard costs. Now in this video we are going to be defining some terms that set the groundwork for our performance evaluation process. First thing is, what are we talking about when we say budgeted costs? Well, a budgeted cost, strictly by definition, is nothing more than an estimate of what the cost of materials might be, what the cost of labor might be, what the electric bill might be. So an estimate of what the cost might be. Now it may be an educated estimate, but it's still an estimate and nothing more than that, a educated guess, if you will. Now compare that to the term standard costs. Standard costs are what the costs of materials, labor, overhead, and supplies, and so forth, what those costs should be. What those costs should be under efficient operations. Okay, so what does that mean? What's this difference here? An estimate versus what the cost should be. Well, standards are very carefully developed based on an analysis of the design of our product to determine exactly how much materials should go into making a single unit of product, exactly how much labor time should be taken to efficiently make one unit of a product. So it may come from time and motion studies and other engineering studies of what efficient operations should cost the business. So there's a difference between an estimate, oh, well, I think we'll probably use 100,000 pounds and maybe it'll cost us $10 a pound. You know, that's kind of a flip way of dealing with estimates. But standards are, again, very carefully determined based on engineering studies, a careful analysis of the economy and what we expect the cost of our resources to do given the economy and the supply of those resources. So a very careful determination of what our product, the inputs into our product, should cost us under efficient operations. Now, I mentioned two things in talking about these standard costs. One was the quantity. So when we are developing a standard cost, one part of that standard cost of a unit of product is the quantity standard. The quantity standard is how much of the input should it take to make a single unit of output. So let me write that down. How much input how much material, how many pounds of material, how many yards of material should it take to make one unit of product? How many labor hours should it take to make one unit of product? How many machine hours? So the input quantity standard, how much of the input should it take or should be used per unit of product? Per unit of finished product, one completed unit. So part of the standard cost is the quantity standard, the input quantity standard. The other part of the standard cost is the price standard. Now, got to be careful of terminology here. I usually think of price as the selling price of our product. But in this case, price refers to the price we have to pay to acquire the input that goes into the product. So it's our cost, if you will, but it's commonly referred to as the price standard. So it's the amount that the input should cost. So how much per pound, given the economy and the supply of that resource, how much per pound should our raw materials cost us? Other factors that enter into that price standard are, well, do we take advantage of price discounts? Discounts for early payment of our bill. Those cash discounts would reduce what we should be paying for our raw materials. Do we buy in bulk? So that quantity discount should enter into determining the price standard. Do we have to pay delivery charges? Then those delivery fees to get the materials to us should be part of our price standard. For materials, the input. For labor, what are the fringe benefits that are paid? What is the going wage rate for the level of skill of our workers? That should enter into. Are we in a union environment? That will enter into the standard price. So what should the input cost us to acquire that input? Now, in coming up with the standard cost of a unit of product, we take the quantity standard, how much of the input should be used, and we multiply it by the price standard. And that in turn gives us the standard cost per unit of finished product. The standard cost per unit of finished product for that particular input. So we'll have both a quantity standard and a price standard and a standard cost per unit for materials, then a quantity standard and a price standard and a standard cost per unit for labor, and same for variable overhead. And fixed overhead, we will have a standard application rate. Remember our predetermined overhead rate? Okay, so that's our standard for fixed overhead. But remember, fixed overhead is incurred in total, not per unit. So we have to be careful of those per unit standards for fixed overhead.